Tonight's breaking Washington news comes from the Wall Street Journal, which reports that some of the president's lawyers have advised him that Jared Kushner should leave the White House, and that those lawyers believed earlier this summer that the president was going to take their advice and get rid of Jared Kushner. So they actually wrote a statement explaining Jared Kushner's departure from the White House, a statement that was obviously never used. The Wall Street Journal reports some of President Donald Trump's lawyers earlier this summer concluded that Jared Kushner should step down as senior White House advisor because of possible legal complications related to a probe of Russia's involvement in the 2016 presidential election, and aired concerns about him to the president. And listen to this sourcing. People familiar with the matter said, after some members of the legal team aired their concerns to Mr. Trump in June, including in at least one meeting in the White House, press aides to the legal team began to prepare for the possibility that Mr. Kushner would step down, drafting a statement explaining his departure. And again, listen to the sourcing, said people familiar with the matter. Some of Mr. Trump's attorneys worried that Mr. Kushner's continued employment carried risks that could possibly involve other White House officials, a person familiar with the matter said. If, for example, Mr. Kushner mentioned the probe even casually in a meeting, aides who heard his remarks could face inquiries from Mr. Mueller's agents. Some lawyers were also concerned that Mr. Kushner might discuss the probe with the president without a lawyer present. The Journal reports tonight that the president's lawyers were aware of meetings that Jared Kushner had with Russians that had not yet then become public, in particular the meeting in June of last year at Trump Tower that was arranged by Donald Trump Jr. The Journal reports tonight, anticipating that the meeting would become public, members of the legal team in June already had developed talking points to manage the political fallout, including a statement that would explain a potential Kushner resignation. The statement on behalf of Mr. Kushner expressed regret that the political environment had become so toxic that what he viewed as a standard meeting was becoming a weapon for Mr. Trump's critics, according to two people familiar with the documents. Obviously, those talking points were never used, or should we say, have not been used yet. Joining us now, Jed Shugerman, professor of law at Fordham University. Also with us, Max Boot, senior fellow for national security studies at the Council on Foreign Relations and a former foreign policy advisor for McCain 2008, Romney 2012, and Rubio 2016. And Peter Baker is the chief White House correspondent for the New York Times and an MSNBC political analyst. Professor Shugerman, to this legal issue of advising the president that it is unwise to have Jared Kushner in the White House because he could be in conversations with White House staff that then would be of interest to the special prosecutor. What's your reading of that?
Well, it's important to look at the timeline. It was actually NBC News that had this headline, was Kushner seeking a Russian bailout for a Manhattan building? Congress will ask. And that was immediately before Kushner's testimony before Congress. So what was that Manhattan building? This all centers on 666 Fifth Avenue, a disastrous real estate purchase, the biggest real estate purchase in Manhattan history, for $1.8 billion. Somehow, Jared Kushner put down only $50 million on a $1.8 billion purchase, and it has been a disaster. He bought it at the top of the market in 2007, and it has been a burden on the family ever since. And the question is, could they get a bailout from Qatar? They couldn't. That fell apart. Then they tried to get a bailout from China. Then the next step in December. This all stems back to that secret line that Kushner tried to spearhead between the Russian embassy and the Kremlin. And that secret line is, there's some conjecture that that was part of a meeting to set up a Russian bailout from VE Bank. That was part of, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine, $1 billion in sanctions being lifted for several $1 million of bailout. That's at least the conjecture.
And Peter Baker, this is not just the leakiest White House in history. This is the leakiest legal team in history because all the sourcing on this points to, at some level, the Trump legal team outside of the White House representing him in the investigation. The sourcing on this is all people familiar with the Trump lawyers and the Trump's press, the lawyers' press people and what they were preparing for Jared Kushner. And here's the president being represented now by an incredible leaky legal team.
Well, that's right. Look, that legal team by itself has been tribal, much like President Trump's own political team. It has its own rivalries internal. Took a while till it sort of shook out to the point where today, at least, it's being led inside by Ty Cobb and outside by John Dowd. That was not the case in June. That there was this turmoil. The team was sort of sidelined. And so on and so forth. There's no question that the previous legal team, the one that's now basically sidelined, had his problems with Jared Kushner. They were frustrated by him because he was, in fact, talking to the president, their client, outside of their presence on the issue of the investigation. They felt that undercut everybody, and it was not the smart way to do business. That came to a head, and I think that's one of the reasons why they're no longer the main part of the legal team.
And we have a statement from one of President Trump's lawyers, Ty Cobb, apparently, the president's special counsel. So he is actually on the White House payroll. He's not one of the. He's not one of the lawyers that this article is actually talking about. So he may not have the vaguest idea what he's talking about when he says the Wall Street Journal is completely false. The Wall Street Journal story is completely false. Jared Kushner is one of the president's most trusted and able and intelligent advisors. He's performed. Okay, it's kind of a meaningless statement that has the only relevant line being it's completely false. And Max Boot, that's from someone who's not in a position to know it's completely false. Mark Corallo was the spokesperson for the legal team, which in and of itself is an unusual position to even exist for a group of lawyers to have. Here's our press spokesman in the world of attorney-client privilege where we're not supposed to say anything. He quit. He resigned some time ago. People like that are out there. People like that are reachable, possibly, for stories like this.
Well, there's no question that this revolving door at the White House makes it difficult to keep people's loyalty and to keep these secrets out of public view. I mean, there's so many questions that are raised by this story. You just raised some of them about why this was leaked and by whom. The even more fundamental question I have is, why was Jared Kushner, hired in the first place? I mean, I guess it's kind of. I mean, I guess it's sort of obvious why he was hired.
Haven't you seen his resume?
It's a glittering resume with a 36-year-old guy with no success in business. His biggest claim to fame is buying and destroying the New York Observer, and all of a sudden he is one of the most powerful aides in the White House. I mean, let's be clear here. I mean, does anybody think remotely there's any chance that if he hadn't been the president's son-in-law, he would have been hired? Or that if he hadn't been the president's son-in-law, he wouldn't have been fired as quickly as Mike Flynn or the Mooch or all the other people who have walked in and out of this White House? I mean, this is a reminder to me of why Congress, in its wisdom in 1967, passed an anti-nepotism law. It is not a good idea to have close relatives on the payroll that you cannot get rid of, no matter how incompetent or compromised they may be. And on the evidence, I would say Jared Kushner is both incompetent and compromised. He is somebody who in any other White House would never have gotten a security clearance in the first place and certainly would never have kept it up until now. I mean, it is a scandal that this guy is still at the very center of White House decision making. This, I mean, even leaving aside, the legal liability involved, this is just a national security risk, and it's just an embarrassment.
And Professor Sugarman, an example of what the Trump lawyers would be nervous about is Jared Kushner, according to all reports, which have not been disputed, advised the president to fire James Comey. This is the guy who had one of the last people speaking to him before he decides to fire the FBI director, believing that that would somehow help him in this investigation. And by all accounts, it's only made things worse. So if you're Trump's lawyer and you know there's a guy in there who's saying to your client, hey, fire the FBI director, you know this person is harming your client from your perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that what we learned with that letter that was being drafted by Stephen Miller, the revelation of about a week ago, that Stephen Miller and Trump drafted a letter and then read it. It was Mike Pence and
about
Jared
the firing
Kushner.
Of Comey,
the letter to that was the real reason they were firing. Yeah. And that allegedly that it was about the Russian probe, and then Kushner behind the scenes was advising this firing. He is the arguments that a prosecutor might be looking at are to look for evidence of conspiracy to obstruct justice, aiding and abetting obstruction of justice, and your and my new favorite word, misprision of a felony.
Yes, exactly.
Great.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.